These are the EVE Chronicles. Victor's sister idly watched the traffic around Monetirid station on his radar. Most of the cargo freighters were Galantine ones, but the police vessels were from the Amar Empire. Monetirid station was located in one of the few Amarian systems close to Galente space, and as such acted as a trade post between the two empires. Victor was on a mission for his corporation, searching for rare minerals to use in the corporation's shields production. A ship undocked from Monetirid station, and Victor immediately noticed the radar signal depicting the newcomer as hostile. It was a ship from Giacinen, Inc., a rival company of Victor's Canute Corporation. The two corporations were at war, their dispute revolving around a system far from Victor's current location. Even if the Amerian system was a lawful place, the fact that the two corporations were officially in a state of war meant that Victor was a free target for the Giacinen frigate fast approaching. Victor quickly activated his warp drive, having no intention of fighting the Koldari frigate on his lightly armed ship. But before he could finish selecting a destination for his warp, he noticed that the Koldari had scrambled him, preventing him from entering warp. Victor veered his ship away from the Koldari vessel, the range still a good 10 kilometers. His ship computer registered a couple of missiles being launched, but their ETA was still some seconds off. In the meantime, Victor activated his anti-scrambling unit. Due to the strength of the Kaldari scrambler, it would take a full minute to de-scramble the warp drive. Ruefully reflecting on frail defenses, Victor longed for his heavily battle-equipped Incursus frigate. Just before the two Kaldari missiles slammed into Victor's ship, he launched a couple of salvos of his best countermeasures in response, hoping to foil the missiles. One of the missiles was fooled into exploding its warhead some way from the hull, but the other stayed its course and smacked into Victor's ship. The shield managed to absorb a fair deal of the damage, but to Victor's dismay, the powerful missile had still managed to breach the armored hull. Two more missiles were launched from the Kaldari ship, and Victor wondered how many the Kaldari captain had. He himself had already spent his best countermeasures, and he had no anti-missile missiles or point defense weapons to deal with the approaching menace. Victor resolved to dig deeply into his power reserves by boosting his shield a couple of times, hoping it could sustain the damage from the missiles. While waiting for the impact, Victor zoomed his camera onto the missiles and noticed their brand. Each of these missiles was almost as expensive as the whole of Victor's ship. It was obvious that the Kaldari was out to destroy him for a bigger reason than just to loot his cargo hold. The missiles crashed into Victor's ship, jolting it around. Victor could feel the impact in his own bones, a sure sign that the ship had received major damage. A quick survey of his ship computer revealed several hull breaches and some structural damage. The hydraulic system was out of order and his oxygen level was dropping fast, indicating a hole in an oxygen tank. The Koldari ship, being considerably faster than Victor's ship after having activated its afterburner, was now close enough to open fire with its short-range lasers. The last missile impact had severely reduced the strength of Victor's shields and his power level was low. The anti-scrambler still needed 20 seconds to complete the de-scrambling, and it was eating into Victor's remaining power supply. Victor forlornly realized that the Koldari had expended almost no power so far, only on the warp scrambler and a small amount on the afterburner. Only now was he using energy weapons against Victor. As Victor's capsule was ejected from his disintegrating ship, Victor wondered whether skipping the anti-scrambling and burning for the station might have been a wiser choice in the situation. EVE Chronicles. Those traveling within the Galente Federation from the Pecanuet Circle to the Patri perimeter can make a shortcut midway through by traversing Aperia, a cold and uninhabited white dwarf system. Few now remember the name Aperia. Most people only know it by what it is commonly called Old Man Star. Interstellar jump drive technology is fairly new. Until it came along, the only way for the empires to expand their territory was to send a ship to a solar system to build a stargate. The fastest versions of these construction ships managed a speed of approximately 30% of the speed of light. At this speed, a system 10 light-years away could be reached in 33 years, or thereabout. The crew of the construction ships was put into cryogenic stasis for the duration of the trip, only to be revived once the destination was neared. Later, after jump drive technology became available, several of these ships were retrofitted with jump drives. This meant that decades-long trips were a thing of the past. However, none of these older models had been built to handle the sort of technology found in these jump drives, and this meant that stories of fateful malfunctions circulated frequently. One such story was that of Old Man Dario's construction ship in YC-11 when the Galante Caldari War was near its end. A Galantine construction ship set out for the desolate system, then known as Uperia. There was little monetary gain to be had from the system's middling asteroid fields, but a stargate there would serve as a link between the Pekinoet Circle and the Patri Perimeter, which made it a good long-term trade prospect. The construction ship departed from Villora System, some 12 light-years distant. Estimated travel time was only a few minutes. The crew consisted of 5 people, a huge reduction from the old days when dozens of crewmen were needed. With the technological advances made over the course of the war, swarms of drones and robots were by that point responsible for most of the actual construction, with the crew acting mostly as operators and technicians. Shortly after the construction ship set out, disaster befell it. A miscalculation in the drive made the jump misfire, sending the ship several light-years off course and planting it in the middle of an asteroid belt. Seconds later, a large asteroid hit the ship full force. The impact killed 4 of the ship's crew, but the 5th survived. His name was Tuul Dariu, and he was the ship's drone operator. Back home, the authorities, still embroiled in the war, were facing great internal debate as they pondered Concord-mediated peace talks with the Caldari. Finding little incentive to lose another multi-million-isk ship on a system with no greater short-term value than Operia, they opted to shelve the project. Since the vessel's calculation error was evident to the station personnel who'd sent it off, and because its subspace beacon and comms arrays had been damaged in the impact, the ship was believed destroyed and written off. Dariu's immediate problem was how to feed himself. To save space and weight, no food was carried on the ship, but the greenhouse bulbs from the ship's earlier incarnation were still equipped to grow edible plants. This, however, required the proximity of a sun to provide the essential light and heat. In short, the greenhouse bulbs and the plant seeds were useless in deep space. Water was an equally pressing problem, as was the shortage of oxygen. The state of the ship did not make things any easier. The asteroid had ripped a huge gash into the side of the ship and destroyed many of the ship's vital systems. The cargo hold was hit especially hard. Debris of destroyed equipment and pieces of the asteroid cluttered the small space. Dariu put his engineering skills to good use to solve these problems. He began by tampering with the fuel tanks. The fuel tanks, filled with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, served a propulsion system once the ship had to be slowed down once near the destination system. Fiddling with the fuel tanks was extremely dangerous, as the ingredients were highly flammable, but with patience and caution, Dariu managed to get a controlled reaction out of the fuel, which gave him both water and oxygen. Then he welded together every piece of glass and metal plate he could muster in the ship to gather and store what little light he could from distant stars. This was sufficient for him to start food production in one greenhouse bulb. By linking the bulb into the ship's septic tank, fertilizers for the plants were secured. The result was enough food for one man, and later enough oxygen production as well. In other words, Dariu managed to create his own little ecological system. Once Dariu had stabilized the conditions on the ship and provided for himself, he next had to adjust the course of the ship. The impact had slightly altered the ship's course, and in the vastness of space it meant the ship would bypass the Operia system by billions of kilometers. The propulsion system had been damaged beyond repair. The ship was out of control and heading into deep space for eternity. The more time spent on a solution, the further adrift the ship would be. So a quick resolution was required. Instead of spending valuable time trying to build a new propulsion system, Dariu opted for a more ingenious solution. The ship was equipped with a token force of combat missiles. Dariu fired the missiles and turned them around to explode against the strongest points of the ship's armor. By carefully calculating the impact points and controlling the size of the explosion, Dariu managed to correctly align the ship to its original course. Dariu briefly contemplated trying to turn the ship completely around, but quickly realized that he neither had enough missiles for this, nor would the hull withstand such a brute way of turning around, even if he had them. Now the dullest part of the journey began. as the ship was still decades from Operia's system at its current speed. Daoyu spent the time creating fantastic robots and designs using the scrap heap in the cargo hold. He discovered that the asteroid that hit the ship had been very rich with the super-rare mineral megasite, which has unique qualities that make it extremely valuable in advanced robotics and drone manufacturing. Having to live and work in zero-gravity year in, year out gave Daoyu a distinctive insight into high-tech assembly, and despite the limited resources and tools at his disposal, what he created during those long years has never since been surpassed in originality or brilliance. At long last, the ship entered the Operia system, 44 years behind schedule due to the decreased speed caused by the impact and subsequent missile explosions. Over the years, Daoyu had invented several techniques for slowing the ship down, just for this occasion. His main method was to use the stellar bodies in the system to help him slow down. Even if the propulsion system itself was still out of order, Daoyu managed to get some of the directional thrusters to work, feeding them with the last drops of fuel. Now he began to zigzag between the system's planets, using the gravity to his advantage to stop the ship and even going so far as to enter the atmosphere at one point, protecting the ship with a handcrafted shield. Through these unorthodox methods, Daoyu managed to stop the ship from shooting out into deep space again. By this time, Daoyu was an old man, his gaunt body in a bad state due to too much time in zero gravity. Yet, his spirit was still strong, and he was unwilling to give up now that he'd managed to reach his destination. Satisfying though it was to be in the Operia system, his situation was still dire as the prospects for any kind of rescue were absolutely none at all. His fate lay entirely in his own hands, and the only option was to try to construct the Stargate all by himself. All the equipment needed to construct the Stargate was long since destroyed or altered beyond recognition. Daoyu was forced to start from scratch devising and building innovative drones and robot factories. He centered his activity around a large asteroid that was conveniently close to the resonance point between the white main star and its tiny brown companion. There, on that asteroid, Daoyu constructed a small assembly factory as well as his home, and for 5 years he labored along with his robot friends to complete, single-handedly, a Stargate, a feat that maybe a handful in the whole universe could pull off. Daoyu performed at the age of 80. White-haired, wrinkled face, shaky hands and all. Imagine the surprise of the Stargate controllers in the Villa system when a patched-up construction ship limped through their Stargate, the triumphant remains of a mission long since considered dead and lost. Daoyu reveled in the media limelight for a while before launching his own company, Creodron, centered on the blueprints created in an incredible voyage lasting almost half a century. He died a few years later, his frail body and failing internal organs too badly damaged for cloning. But his legacy remains strong to this day. Creodron is the biggest drone manufacturing company in the universe of New Eden, and the innovations of its founder still drive the drone industry. Renaming the Operia system the Old Man Star is the least an appreciative world can do. This has been the EVE Chronicles. Thank you for listening.